Damn, I wish I knew how to make things like this. I don't even know where to start. What does it even mean by dry brushing?
Buckle up, because it's time you learn the basics. Grab some material. Don't forget the biscuits.
If you're anything like me, when I first started crafting, I saw all these amazing builds online and wondered how I'd ever get to that level. But don't worry, in this video, I'm going to show you a bunch of basic techniques I use daily. We're going to start with woodgrain. Whether it's a small sign, a tree, or a whole house, grab your pencil and begin to draw in uneven, sporadic lines and push in with the tip of the pencil to give it grooves, ensuring they're somewhat circular. Every GM needs a set of ruins. We're going to practice stonework by carving out a thin bit of foam using the knife to flick up and snap off pieces. When you're happy with the shape, rule out some bricks, go in with the pencil and thicken the lines by running it down the knife grooves. Carve in some cracks, flick out some corners, and then grab an aluminium bowl, run it over it, and that'll give it a nice texture. As for natural stone, you'll want to carve a bit more sporadically. Nature isn't perfect, and neither are we, so just take your knife to it until you get a rough shape you like. Once again, taking to it with an aluminium bowl to ensure that we get that stone texture. Throw a bit of scrap in there to simulate loose stone. I decided this stone pillar needed a sign, so using the same wood technique, I made this tiny little sign and beveled the edges to make it look a little worn. Once it was glued on, I decided it needed a torch. We're going to take a look at this technique a little more in depth later on, but grab your hot glue and begin to stretch it out until you get a sort of rough flame shape. You might need to hold it and blow on it and let it dry for a bit. When it's all dried, snip off the little dangly bits and stick it where you want it. I also realized that I forgot the wood grain, so I went back with a sharp tool and just drew in those lines. One of my favorite beginner projects is a campfire. Grab a bit of foam and carve a base for the sticks to sit on. Go and find some stones to yoink or some gravel or something and filter through the big ones. Then, with hot glue, just stick them around the edge. When it's dry, chop up some matchsticks into smaller pieces to fit and cover the entire base with hot glue. Sprinkle on some dirt to simulate the charcoal at the bottom. Add a big dollop of hot glue and just begin stacking the sticks. When you feel good about the shape, chuck on the hot glue on top, and just like we did with the torch, let it dangle and dry in a couple different ways. Fiddle around with it with your fingers, some wood, until you get some nice little strings sticking up. Yeah, that's some good looking flame. Now that we've got the base, we're gonna Mod Podge. This is a sealer, a glue, and a finishing product. Just add some paint to it in the color you want and begin to coat everything. This will all seal it in and give it a lot more durability, which foam usually doesn't have. I cannot stress this enough, super important. I do the stone black as a base coat and then all of the wood brown. Then we're going to move on to base coating using overbrushing. Grab a dry brush, get most of the paint off but leave a healthy amount and begin to go over all of the surfaces. The reason that we have a dry brush is so that it doesn't seep the paint into the nooks and crannies and it gives it that depth. I use a dark grey for the stone and then a burnt sienna for the wood parts. The level of coverage doesn't really matter because any missed spaces will just add detail. And then we're going to start dry brushing. Grab a dry brush, take off almost all the paint and just hit those top surfaces. I tested on my hand before taking it to the foam. If you accidentally leave too much paint on, that's okay. If it leaves a big smear, it's just a highlight. I use a tan on wood and stone surfaces. And then go in with a green and add it to where I plan to put moss. If you think the color's a little too bright, we're gonna add a wash which will tone it down. Using a black, I just painted on some gibberish. And now for flames. You're going to want yellow, orange, and red. Start with the yellow, move up to orange, and then finally a red. And while the paint's still wet, begin to blend them together with your brush. You can get better results with an airbrush, but with just a paintbrush, this looks pretty good. And remember, fire is chaotic and sporadic, so just take your brush and go for it. When everything's base coated, we want to do some highlights. I take an off-white and gently dry brush once again over all of the surfaces, including the wood and stone. I was afraid of washes to begin with, and how wrong was I? It really adds detail. You can make one with some water, some black paint, and a little bit of dish soap, and then go over covering all of your surfaces with it. I find the little details make the big difference. I use hemp rope to add little grass tufts into the wooden pieces. glued in with some PVA. While it dries, I make these tiny little mushroom heads using hot glue and toothpicks. And while they dry, I go back with the PVA and begin to spread it everywhere I want the flocking and moss, trying to focus on those sort of hidden, in-depth pieces. If you want to buy this type of flocking, I have links down in my description, but I will also link how to make your own if you don't want to spend money. Add the toothpicks to the heads, paint them up in the colors you want. I like red and blue, I think it's very like fairy tale and great. We add one last layer of highlights using an off-white and then go back in with the brown and white mixture and add a little bit of grit and dirt to it. I mix it up and with a dry brush just sort of stipple it on, stabbing and whacking in random places. I add little dots to the mushrooms, maybe a little bit of dry brush, and then once that I'm happy with it, I stick it into place with more PVA. These fine little details really make the difference. I then go over the stone and add the flocking just as I did with the wood. And I think we're just about done. And congrats, you're well on your way to becoming a master crafter. Here's them next to my other builds, which you can check out at the videos on the left. If you like this video, please consider subscribing, leaving a like and a comment down below letting me know what you want to see. And as always, see you on the next adventure.